Hi everyone, I'm Lara Houston. I'm a repair researcher at Goldsmiths, and I'm really delighted to have with me on this panel Alison Powell, who's an assistant professor here at the LSE in Media and Communications. And her work explores questions of data governance, technological citizenship and ethics. She's working on a book about smart cities and the Internet of Things, which I'm really excited to read. And her other projects have explored DIY communities, from software and hardware to citizen science. And her work also actively contributes to policy, and I think kind of visions of the future and policy will be a key part of our discussion today. Our second panelist is Kyle Wiens, the co-founder and CEO of iFixit. And in his home country of the US and around the world, I think Kyle is a noted repair activist fighting to get right to repair legislation enacted and policy, so to kind of expand the kind of access that consumers and technicians have to devices themselves, to tools, spare parts and service manuals. So how we're going to run the session is the speakers will get up and give a few remarks, and then we'll open the session up to discussion. I've got some burning questions ready here, but you guys can also contribute, so as the question and discussion emerges, put up your hand and I'll keep pulling questions in from the audience. Okay, so Alison, would you like to go first?
Thank you to Lara for chairing and to Kyle for being my co-panelist. I'd also like to take the opportunity to welcome you as the LSE representative of your day to my home university, and I hope you've had a comfortable time here in our spaces. And I want to just bring a little bit of my own perspective to your discussion. As Laura said, I work in the Department of Media and Communication, but I've been working for a really long time on research that has been connected to and embedded in technological cultures. And so I've worked with hackers who have been trying to build their own internet access networks. I have looked at people who have attempted to expand the idea of open source from software to hardware, doing some of the first academic work on open hardware movements. And now I'm really concerned with the kind of most recent transformation in this space, which is the move towards the Internet of Things, which we tend to understand as being about the kind of realm of connected objects, sort of perpetually connected objects that are always sending information to the internet and often sending information to each other. But for me, one of the other key considerations of this change and move towards connected objects is that all of a sudden many more of these objects are black boxed than we have encountered in the past. One of the principles of the open hardware movement was to try to make hardware accessible on the same terms as software. That is, to make the idea of how something is put together understandable to people, so that people could decide to both repair it and to make things work differently. And of course, there's you all know much more about repair than I do, but I came to repair when I started working on open hardware and looked at repositories like Thingiverse that explain how electronics are put together so that people can both repair them and make electronics work differently. Now that we move into this sort of space of connected objects, what we're finding is that there's an arms race among the companies who are building connected technologies to try to build them to all make ecosystems that are proprietary. And then we start having some major problems, not just for being able to modify hardware or to make different kinds of technologies interoperable, but also big problems in terms of the right to repair. So you also probably know about some of the major right to repair cases. I think Kyle's going to talk more about these. But the sort of most high profile of these is the fight between the John Deere Corporation and farmers who are no longer able to repair their tractors because the tractors are software controlled through a central server system that only John Deere has access to. John Deere claims that when people start modifying their tractors, they are violating the terms of service upon which they agreed to when they purchased the tractors. Because simply speaking, what happens when you move to a series of competitive connected objects ecosystems is that you move towards a service model. Rather than buying an object that you own forever, that if you want to take it apart and put it back together, you can do that. You now often, when you're buying a personal assistant or a tractor, are buying a service contract with a company that can operate your device remotely with your agreement because you have agreed to purchase that service over time. And this is one of the main business models for what we are starting to think of as the kind of Internet of Things ecosystem. A really good example of this is, of course, the in-home personal assistant, which perpetually records everything that you're saying in order to give you good recommendations for when you do decide to use your personal assistant and when you say, Alexa, please reorder me 100 bolts of 1/8 of an inch Phillips screwdriver size.
Okay, ordered.
Thank you, Alexa. Great efficiency. However, there are some problems because I've made a service level agreement to Amazon for the use of Alexa. If I wanted Alexa to order me to do something completely different, I would be violating the warranty on the service, and I would no longer be able to use any of that. So we have some right to repair challenges. We also have right to repair challenges that are connected to other kinds of commercial decisions, like planned obsolescence. And there is some progress being made in terms of enshrining these rights to repair in law. And I think Kyle will talk more about the US context, but I did want to note that in the European Union, right to repair laws will soon be enshrined in agreements that have to do with the longer lifespan of products. So here in Europe, well, here temporarily in Europe, in Europe the rest of the time, there are already some consumer-led legal decisions that will enshrine this right to repair. However, manufacturers of connected object systems do not support these provisions for right to repair, largely because there is a perceived risk of opening up connected systems because of the threat of hacking. So if you have a set of connected objects and all the objects are connected and one of them is very easy to open, you can use that connected object to hack into the whole system. So there are some very high-profile hacking cases that have come into the public view recently, such as using connected camera systems to hack into whole systems. And the most high-profile and probably most hilarious one, of which I wonder if you've already discussed this weekend, is of course the drive-by hacking of insecure sex toys. This is not a joke. It turns out that Internet of Things connected sex toys have serious vulnerabilities, and that if you hack into these systems, you can therefore get access to other objects that are connected to the same system. So the security blog called... These are vibrators and dildos.
Why are they connected to the internet?
So that you can, store...
It's called teledildonics. The field of teledildonics is growing quickly.
It's called teledildonics.
This is a very old field. It's as old as the internet. Okay, I see I've just surprised a few people who had never thought about why you might want to connect such a thing to the internet. This is a real dilemma in this space. This is the security blog pen test rates. Autonomous vehicles require significant investment to develop, and their output is considered a trade secret. The real-time nature of self-driving vehicles means that sensitive code must be inside the vehicle, potentially allowing an attacker to access the entire vehicle. So how do you allow users to update the firmware that drives their car without leaking all of the details of how that connected car actually works to competitors? Suddenly we're in a very, very different space. We've all noticed that it's much more difficult to repair our cars because when you lift the hood, there's a black box under there. But few of us have thought that that black box, like the Alexa personal assistant, is now regulated under a service contract. And that the firmware that actually operates the entire car system is extremely difficult to audit. You can reverse engineer the firmware that actually makes your car drive. That is, of course, the firmware is the really basic level software machine code that actually makes the parts of the car do their job as software connected electronics. You can reverse engineer this, but it's really difficult to figure out how it works. So this is a real problem, right? And it's being perceived as an insoluble one. That means the sacrifice of the right to repair. Because if you have too much of a right to repair, then all of your systems will be open, they will be insecure, and like all of these hilarious examples I gave you, these open systems can be used to penetrate other systems that are also connected to them. So now what do? How do we reassert the right to repair? I'm going to give one tiny potential way forward, and then I'm going to try and rile you up for Kyle. So my potential way forward is that the Android phones have a kind of framework that they use that's basically a back and forth conversation between the person with the phone and the central server created by the manufacturer. And this is a kind of nod to the open source origins of Android and the way that these devices are kind of always been understood to allow people with expertise to manage their own permissions. So there's a kind of like double check-in that happens. And there's a bit of an air gap here. So you can say, all right, I'm going to modify what's on my phone, and that's checked cryptographically and then sent to the central server, and the central server verifies and says, yes, we checked that, sends back. You can change your settings on your own phone because there's this security gap. But, this is still a problem for security companies because Android phones are unlocked sometimes in order to access app stores with free cracked apps, and then those apps bring in malware that makes your phone work incorrectly. So even this system still has some problems. So what I think we should be starting to think about is a kind of reorientation of the right to repair to encompass the right to audit and the right to scrutinize both the service level contracts, the right to opt out of them and retain ownership of the device, even if your service contract no longer continues, and also the right to be able to effectively audit with some kind of outside expertise, perhaps, the kinds of firmware, which is the sort of software that makes electronics operate. I think there are many other issues, but I've sort of tried to lay out the kind of basic ones, and I look forward to your questions in a moment. Thank you.
Thank you. That was awesome. Okay. Continuing on this, the Barnes & Noble Nook license agreement says in the license agreement, thou shalt not disassemble the Nook, or you're violating our license agreement. So clearly we have some challenges. I firmly believe repair is not a crime, and I'm going to explain a little bit about how we're doing this, but briefly, I talk with policymakers a lot, and I tell them this, right? I'm from the internet, and I'm here to help. I talk with repair shops. They're terrified they're going to go out of business. I'm from the internet, and I'm here to help. We can do this. So if you're not familiar with iFixit, we're an online open source community. We're the Wikipedia of repair. Our goal is to teach everybody how to fix all of their things, and we do that through open source information. And the reason that I got into this was I was in the same situation a lot of you are frequently. Someone comes into a repair cafe, they have a device. How do I open it? Where are the tabs? We Google it. If Google has the answer, yay, we can do it. And if it doesn't, then you're tugging and pulling. So I had this exact same challenge. I was in the dorms at Cal Poly in California trying to take apart my iBook, couldn't figure it out, so I Googled it, couldn't find the Apple service manual, and I knew what the service manual looked like because I had worked at an Apple authorized service dealer, right? So I knew that it existed and I couldn't have it, and that made me mad. And so that's why we started iFixit. It was like, we have to enable people to have the information that they need to be able to do their repairs. And from a design perspective, I like to think of what we do as crafting and designing intuitive repair experiences. And that's what all of you are doing with these local repair events. We have to make repairing things easier than buying new things. Right? We want to get to a place where we can save the world through sheer laziness. And that means repair has to be the easy, obvious choice. So iFixit's a community. People are posting all kinds of things. This was the first ever community teardown that was posted on iFixit. It was actually the first product that had the Sony logo on it. And this is inside. Pretty awesome. We have some more far afield products. My dad ran a Harley-Davidson motorcycle shop, and so it's really cool that we have motorcycle repair guides on iFixit now. We also have repair guides for more intergalactic products. Hey, we're an equal opportunity repair center. Okay, so iFixit, like the scale that iFixit has grown to completely surpasses my understanding. People ask me all the time, hey, does iFixit have repair manuals for XYZ? And I say, maybe. So get on there and take a look. We helped in the last 12 months, I just looked at the stats, 100 million people were on iFixit looking at how to repair things. Yeah. This is a huge number, so let me make it smaller. This is the number of people in the UK in the last 12 months. Oh. So I did some division. I studied math in university. So 13% of the population. It's pretty damn cool. And we continue to do this. So for me, iFixit, not only are we influencing consumers, but we also are able to use iFixit as a platform to enable social change. And along with a lot of you, so we've got members, a lot of local repair organizations have profiles on iFixit. Restart Project is on here. Where's Philippe? Is he here? Here, okay. So I've got your profile here. So he's been adding repair guides to iFixit, and he's amazing. He's over 2,000 reputation. And I snooped on your email. This is the email that we sent you. In the last 30 days, the content you put on iFixit has helped 7,900 people. 5,300 of those were, how do I fix a printer head? Which we all know is common. Okay, so how are we leveraging this to accomplish social change? We really think that repair is going to be a cornerstone of a circular economy, of an economy that all of us want to live in over the next 100 years. So I mentioned Apple was making life challenging for repair. There's other companies that are doing the same thing. This is a letter that Toshiba sent Tim Hicks, who's a friend of mine from Australia. We'll represent Australia. Tim's a really great guy. This is from Toshiba, Australia, and they're sending him legal threats for sharing service manuals. He runs a website called Tim's Laptop Service Manuals. He uploads service manuals to his website, and they didn't like that. And so we designed them a new logo. So it can be challenging to look at social change and say, this is so hard, we have these complicated systems, government doesn't listen to us. Is it possible to get things done? Yes, it's possible to get things done. The first law that we tried to influence in the United States was around cell phone unlocking. We put a petition together and got 114,000 people to say that they wanted unlocking cell phones to be legal in the United States. And I wrote editorials, and it worked. And I actually wrote a bill that Obama signed.
Has Trump reversed it?
What's that?
Has Trump reversed it?
Trump has not reversed it. Trump doesn't even. Trump's very dependent on his cell phone. I think we're going to be okay. All right. So right to repair is growing around the world. The most recent right to repair law that was passed was for cars in Massachusetts, the state of Massachusetts in 2012. We passed cell phone unlocking, and now we're working on other types of campaigns. And this is around making devices more repairable, and also around policies that will and require manufacturers to share information. So Greenpeace is campaigning on this right now, doing an awesome job. There's an organization, repair.org, that's working on green standards and legislation. We've got cartoons running, and this cartoon ran in Wired magazine. And this is the kind of EULA agreements that you're talking about. We've got folks campaigning against Samsung. This is a part that we can't sell on iFixit because we just can't get enough of them. And all of you know people come in with a Samsung phone, and they're just too expensive to fix. Not because they're not possible to disassemble, but because we can't get the parts. Farmers are getting involved. So this actually ran in an Iowa Farm magazine. Arresting farmers for fixing tractors. So we actually got the Massachusetts law. The Massachusetts Farm Bureau is supporting right to repair for cell phones because the bill also includes tractors. Right? So by setting up a big tent, we've got more allies involved. It's awesome. So this is what we're doing in the U.S. State level legislation is more promising. Federal legislation is pending, but difficult. It's going to take a lot longer. Right now in the U.S., 13 states are considering right to repair legislation. No one has passed it yet, but all of these states are having discussions, and I actually came here straight from a hearing in Massachusetts where we were testifying in favor of right to repair, and we had a lot of allies. We had Harvard and MIT and local entrepreneurs in favor of it, and we had the electronics manufacturers on the other side screaming doom and gloom, this is going to wreck the world. And so we have to convince the politicians that we're right. And the only way that we're going to convince them is by all of you getting engaged. So you mentioned some of the successes. I just wanted to list. These are successes that have happened in the EU on right to repair in the last 5 years. There is a lot of progress happening. Spain and Belgium have reuse targets. Sweden has some incredible tax deductions for repair services, and on and on. So this is kind of our overall EU strategy, and I'm going to leave this up, and then maybe we'll go back to our panel discussion. But what I want to leave all of you with is this idea that social change can happen. It is very possible to get right to repair done. The path that we're on right now isn't going to take us there, but if we get all of you actively involved and we get more people working on it, clearly we've shown we've got the physics on our side, we've got logic on our side. If we can get the grassroots support and some community organizers making it happen, this is something that we can get done. Thank you.
Well, thanks for two fantastic presentations that I think touch on a lot of issues that we've all been talking about today in our respective panels. And I wanted to go back to, before I open it up to the floor, to this question of security that seems so present in both your talks. So Kyle, do you have any thoughts about Alison's kind of questions and challenges to repair when we get into these proprietary tethered ecosystems?
Yeah, do we have any software engineers in the room? Okay, all right. So how do you guys feel about security via obscurity?
It's inaccurate.
Okay. Right.
Serious point here, right? I work on this stuff, back-end software for servers and stuff like that. If you knew how ragged, how weak, how pathetic this stuff is, you would shit your pants and never bank online again. The attack surface is massive, okay? There are so many holes in this stuff that haven't been discovered, let alone the millions that have already been discovered. Whose fault is this? Is it the fault of people who want to repair stuff, or is it the fault of the people who don't design software properly from the ground up?
Right.
If the software is rock solid from the ground up, you could take the damn thing apart, do whatever you like to it, put it back together in a different way, and the server software would never even care.
Right.
Okay?
Yes.
So fundamentally, what they're saying is, don't touch our stuff because it's so delicate it will fall apart if you touch it.
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah, and fundamentally, anytime they're arguing in favor of keeping these systems locked down, it's because they're afraid that they built it poorly. Open systems withstand more scrutiny. So when we say security via obscurity, for those of you that are not software engineers, what we mean is that if you have a lock, disassembling the lock and understanding how the lock works should not make it easier to pick that lock. If it's a well-designed lock, it will resist even the best attempts at reverse engineering. For a long time, the lock manufacturers hated lock picking and hated people publishing it. And over time, they realized that they had to embrace the lock picking community because it made them better. And that's going to be the case with manufacturers. Right to repair will make products more secure. The manufacturers are going to have to learn to work with us and coexist. And the more open systems there are, the more resilient those systems will be.
Yeah, of course, and this is also the principle of open source software development, which now has wound its way into most of the software-based wiki-based products that we encounter in our everyday lives. Most web servers run open source software. It is among the most robust forms of software, in part because it is very easy for people to identify problems and bugs, and because the value of identifying those problems and bugs is of generally useful application, right? So if I find a problem and a bug in some source code that can be used for 56 different things, I've actually solved 56 people's problem by finding that bug. However, this doesn't work very well with the firm intellectual property perspective that Kyle kind of outlined with his series of cartoons about the difficulties of people claiming a right to repair. So what we have is a kind of the logical and rigorous practice of developing software, as an example, in one particular way, running up against a money-making paradigm that sees exclusion of systems and competition of systems as being a better way of building products, not necessarily better products, but products that are can more easily have little tiny proprietary markets. And you see this in the Internet of Things. And my vision as a sort of, I probably look younger than I am, but as a kind of like been on the internet a long time person, was that we'd get to the Internet of Things and it would kind of be a glorious interconnected utopia, you know, using common standards where, you know, we could actually have different sorts of systems speaking to each other in a much more kind of democratic communication space. What has actually happened is that every tiny company wants to have their own proprietary standard for connecting only their own objects to their own system. And we have and this is where this kind of, you know, security theater comes in. If you've got your own tiny little ecosystem and the whole thing is super fragile, and if anybody opens it up, they're going to see it's super fragile and build a competitor instantly that's way better, you obviously don't want to open it up. So I think, you know, we're kind of on the same page around this, but I see it as a market problem, really. I think people are trying to, you know, create market competition where actually there's no need.
The Economist thinks it's a market problem.
I'm not an economist.
But you're our representative of the...
Well, no, I think I'm like the official weirdo Marxist that they let in every so often.
Awesome. That's great. Well, I agree. I think that's something it'd be nice to do something about. And if consumers are demanding more open systems, more interconnected systems, it will help.
I think it's hard. I think it's hard for consumers to know what to demand.
Right.
Right? We're getting sold internet-connected hairbrushes with no explanation of, you know, why a hairbrush needs to be connected to the internet, but much less, you know, teledildonics, right? There is an assumption that a connected object is better than a non-connected object.
Yeah, but that's what we teach in design school these days as well, you know. Like, I had to do internet-connected things 12 years ago in design school and refused to, and they said that I would fail design school. So I made the stupidest internet-connected thing I could think of, which was like an alarm clock that played your favorite song, I don't know, whatever it was. But this is the reality, like, it's the new fad, right? So we need to also have that responsibility in the design sector about what is necessary in what we're putting in the world and what's going to actually have just, like, unintentional, like, negative impacts when your dildo does its own thing for you.
But I'm interested in the idea that lack of repairability might frustrate the sector entirely, because, I mean, people in the UK will know this example of the guy trying to boil his connected kettle and it took him 10 hours.
Yeah.
How might a lack of repairability actually frustrate the emerging Internet of Things movement? Or
Well, I mean, it might drive people. What ends up happening, you integrate batteries into everything. The Nest thermostat, you might not know, it's got like 1,000 milliamp hour lithium battery in it, in the thermostat. So that makes recycling a challenge for it, but it also means that you're limiting the lifespan of that product to a couple years. So to the extent that people get frustrated by limited lifespans on products, perhaps. But we haven't done a good job of educating consumers at purchase time not to buy something that's not going to last very long.
so I want to take a question from the audience.
Just keep the questions short because there's many.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that I think dumbing it down. It's much more serious than you're making it. When you talk about medical devices that have the ability to kill people, you're talking about cars, planes, things like these that could have very serious impacts. And the elephant in the room is the Digital Millennium Copyright Act, which forbids people to break any, no matter how bad the crypto is, to go past that and and that was created in order to protect music businesses and things like that, media businesses, which we've destroyed, or we're in the possibility of destroying the open internet, especially with the ITF legislating its encrypted media extension. So I just wanted to...
Yes, you would have laughed a lot less in my talk if I had started telling you about the hackability of pacemakers. I don't know if there are any people in this room who use pacemakers, but these are systems that are also service model systems. If you have a pacemaker, you do not have the control over the pacemaker. And in fact, the intellectual property of the pacemaker systems, in some cases, has been transferred from one company to another over the lifetime of the device, which means that a device that is inside your body, which is required to keep you alive, is essentially a kind of intellectual property, piece of value that's being transferred around between companies. And there are increasing concerns about the ways that these sort of service level agreements for essential life-saving devices are both obscure. We have no idea what's inside those pacemakers. It is, of course, completely illegal to hack them even if you wanted to. But I think that the rising risk to people's lives of having the systems be obscure might be one possible direction for actually being able to recapture some of the rights to know how those systems work, and perhaps to have an individual right to the function of your pacemaker, right? It is the point at which truly tragic things begin to happen that often some of these frameworks change. And so I can make you laugh by talking about connected dildos, but actually likely the policy space is going to change more quickly when people start to understand what the risks of an autonomous vehicle having its the firmware that connects its collision decision system being transferred from one company to another. A collision decision system is going to decide who gets hurt in a crash.
Right, but we should just trust the auto manufacturers.
No, I don't. Well, yeah, you should. Obviously, because they don't lie, right?
Right. Well, so speaking of that, so you bring up the DMCA. To take a step back and explain what the DMCA is, it's the Digital Millennium Copyright Act. It's the U.S. law that was passed in 1998 to kind of regulate copyright on the internet. And since then, the U.S. has exported that law to Europe and elsewhere. So it impacts all of you, even if you don't live in the U.S. And there's a piece in there that's the first time we've ever regulated math, and it says that it's illegal to circumvent a lock protecting a copyrighted work. Meaning if you have cryptography that's like a cell phone that's locked that uses cryptography, it means it's illegal to unlock the cell phone. That's why we had to pass the unlocking cell phone law, because of the DMCA. So we've got here this Unlocking Devices Act. This is actually a fix to the DMCA that's being proposed that we're working on. And they have a process that we go through in the US of applying for changes to these laws. And I've actually sat in a room like this at UCLA where I was on one side and the auto manufacturers and Volkswagen were on the other side. And they were talking about why we could not make changes to software on cars and why they couldn't open the software up to anyone else to tinker, because the emission systems were incredibly complex and proprietary, and no one could be trusted to get it right except them. And this was only the month before the whole thing came out.
Yeah, so I mean, thinking about this from a kind of policy change perspective, I think it's precisely the VW emissions scandal that should be used as a point as a narrative point in the story, right? Oh, it turns out if you keep the systems black box, you are going to kill us. you're going to poison us with emissions that are over the legal level. You are going to, risk stopping somebody's heart because of a dispute over intellectual property. You are going to, run into innocent grandmothers because the decision system, the crash decision system, has been bought by somebody who wants to change the overall risk for autonomous cars. Like, these are the stories the point at which you start going, oh, actually, maybe we need to have a right for people to look at these systems and to audit them, and therefore to have access to them, and therefore to be able to repair them, right? If it's software-based repair also.
And that's where repair really becomes a wedge and a window into effective social change to bring us back control of our devices. Repair is a very common sense issue. You go to a legislator and say, I want to be able to fix this phone, I can't fix it. I want to be able to connect this diagnostic to this tractor, I can't fix it. Everyone wants to fix things. But in the process of being able to get access to repair them, we're also opening the systems up to security researchers, to independent auditors. It creates a much more open, inclusive society. And that's why I've been so excited to spend effectively my life working on Right to Repair, because repair is hugely important strategically, environmentally, but it is also a window into a world where we aren't locked out of all of the things that we own.
So I'd like to open it up to some questions from the audience.
Hello, hi. I want to just bring up something. I've just, in listening to what you say about sort of these service contracts and moving to a product service systems, from the point of view of environmental sustainability, they've been lauded as being the way forward. So I'd like to just, for you to just help me through this sort of what we see as kind of an opposition between the right to access and effectively not to be locked out of our products, with perhaps a model that would make manufacturers take a greater responsibility for their products, which is what the product service systems have been sold to us as being. So can you help me through that?
That is an excellent question. I was sort of vaguely aware that this is sort of the environmental promise. In reality, there's not much of an environmental promise because there is planned obsolescence that's attached to many of these systems. And if you have a kind of server product service contract, and the product comes to the end of its sort of planned obsolescence lifespan, you upgrade the product as well. We basically are all leasing mobile phones most of the time, and there's no evidence that leasing mobile phones is leading to less mobile phone waste. I think perhaps there might be. I might be convinced if it was a buy once in a lifetime. But it doesn't seem like these are this is the way that this is established. Did you want to kind of come back and clarify? Okay.
Yeah, I'm not talking about the mobile one because that is actually a time-limited thing. I'm talking about the models, for instance, where I am paying for the service to wash my clothes. So I don't own the machine. All I want is clean clothes.
Right.
And so I pay, and so it's in the interest of the manufacturer to make that machine, because they are responsible for it now. They want to be able to remanufacture as many parts as possible. They want to make it as reliable as possible because that's going to cut down their maintenance bill, et cetera, et cetera. So I'm talking about that model, which presumably is, and they're going to be monitoring this over the internet, of course, the sort of the Xerox model. How does that connect up with that model that makes manufacturers more responsible for their products and in theory produces products that are more reliable, that have longer lives and that are remanufactured, et cetera, et cetera? How does that tie up with the fact that effectively maybe we've got this other situation where, I don't know, I'm seriously just kind of exploring it.
But do you want to imagine a world, if you think about all of the things that you own, do you really want to be paying monthly for access to all of them? I think a lot of us have gone through the transition with Adobe Photoshop over the last few years. You can't buy Photoshop anymore. You have to pay $10 a month forever for access to it. And that's a more sustainable model for Adobe, right? But I don't think the rest of us are appreciating it very much. So yes, I mean, I think from a pure sustainability perspective, on those devices, if they're able to manage the life cycle, it certainly puts them more into that system. But it creates a world where the rest of us are disempowered and disenfranchised, and I fear that it leads to a world where fewer of us are tinkering. So I think that they've got a solid environmental argument that works for certain products. It definitely doesn't scale past a few % of the products in the economy. And for everything else, I think it's up to all of us to create an alternative sustainable story to combat that. Because I really like owning things. I want to own relatively few quality things, but those things that I have, I like tinkering with my truck. I want to be able to continue to do that.
I hate owning things, but I don't want the person who owns them to, suddenly change the way that they work because it's financially or mostly financially beneficial for them without considering, what the other consequences might be.
Just to throw that into the mix, there was a fire station in northern England that celebrated the birthday of a 150-year-old light bulb.
I think there's a paradigm shift needs to happen. If we go back to the Sony example, Sony chase hackers. They should be hiring the hackers, not chasing them. Yeah.
Right. Absolutely, I agree. I don't have anything to add. I mean, right, over time, companies have to learn to work with security researchers. They have to learn to work with the repair community. And right now, there's this antagonistic relationship. I think that I am Apple's least favorite person in the world. Okay, but I love Apple. I don't want there to be that antagonistic relationship, right? We want to figure out a way that we can work together. And it's going to involve us having respect for their IP and finding some barriers, but also it's going to involve them learning to be a little bit more open.
A question about storytelling and scaling here and motivating change. I'm curious what both of you think about what other places we can look and what are the stories, say, in the types of intellectual property violations that happen in southern China with like Gongkai and Shanzai, which is like kind of open source, make whatever you want, who cares about intellectual property, break the rules, culture that works in another place, and what can we learn, what can we import, what can't we touch? If that makes any sense.
So I brought these, and I'll let you read what that says. And I'm going to see if I can pull something up. Does this computer have an internet connection?
This says, this is a ceramic capacitor. It costs 5 cents. If you spill water on your iPhone, one of these parts may burn out, turning your iPhone into a paperweight. Independent repair shops can replace this part for under $100. You may also go to the Apple Store and pay $269 to $329 to have your entire phone replaced. Will it work in my Wiley Fox?
That's a fairly straightforward part. So this is, and if you look at how small this is, it's about a fifth of the size of a grain of rice. And this is a very common, so the professional repair shops are swapping these out now. They're using schematics like this. The schematic for every iPhone falls off a truck somewhere in China and people get it. And all of the repair shops are doing this. If you come across any cell phone repair shop that says that they're doing data recovery, they're actually doing micro soldering, they're repairing the phones. They're doing things that Apple absolutely cannot and will not do. You go into an Apple store with a phone that you've dropped into the toilet and say, please, here's $1 million in my phone, get me my data back. They will not get it for you. The only way to do those repairs is with schematics like this. And you can see I'm just doing a Google image search. Like, this stuff is available, right?
Yeah, but it's illegal to have.
But it's illegal for me to show you. Yeah. Yeah, so this is the kind of thing, like the manufacturers are like the ostrich with their head stuck in the sand. They don't realize the information is already out there. And so what's happening is you have the Shanzai, the repair techs who are in Asia, are doing it and not feeling bad about it. And the folks here that are using this are feeling guilty about it. I went into a repair shop in Cambridge that was doing data recovery, and I asked them, like, how are you doing this? And they didn't want to tell me. I was like, dude, I know you're using the schematics. It's okay. And then I said, hey, will you please show up and testify at this right to repair hearing next week in Boston? And he said, well, I don't want to put my head up above, right, because Apple's going to blow my head off. And there's a latent fear in the repair community because increasingly the kinds of repairs that we have to do require access to information that is technically illegal. It's a struggle.
Okay,
Thank you. Just
one last question.
Just
there.
drawing on that point, so Niall Winters from Restart. Have you learned or engaged anything from more sort of human rights or civil rights-based approaches to changing, if you will, societal structures? So it's kind of a political point you're making there about people raising their head above the parapet. So, how do you engage and learn from others rather than trying to reinvent the wheel just for the repair community?
I think you just have to look at modern political movements and see who's having the most success. The single organization that has changed more laws around the world in a rapid period of time, faster than anything I've ever heard of, is Uber. And love them or hate them, I particularly detest a lot of their management and what they're doing, but they've been very, very successful at changing laws, and the reason is that they've engaged their customers. So if Chicago is considering banning Uber, every single customer gets a push notification on their phone that says, call City Council now and protect your right to use Uber in Chicago, and it's very, very effective. So I think we need to learn from activating the grassroots. And I mean, all of us, every single repair event that we're having, we have people coming in, they're getting a great repair experience. There's an opportunity to catalyze people as part of this social movement. Every single interaction that we have. And when I give talks to professional repair shops, I say the same thing. Every single customer, every single person that you help is someone that could be talking with their elected representative to help us get this thing done.
I want to just add to that, and I want to think about connecting together things that are actually dealing with the same issues. So I wanted, when I was, wanted to talk a little bit about, repair, scrutability, and auditability as actually being kind of three kinds of things that are about the same thing, which is the ability to understand how things are made around you and to make them work differently if you want, and to not only be kind of excited about our own kind of tinkering projects, but also to be able to think about them in relation to other things that are as important but that may not be the thing that we do right now.
So I want to sneak in one final question. How many repair manifesto writers have we got in the room? Put your hands up.
We got
Layla, we got Kyle.
Where's
the
Jane?
Sugru, folks? I think it's
everyone but the original. Where's Platform 21?
No, I know.
We stand on the shoulders of giants.
But I find repair manifestos really interesting because they're kind of advocating for a more careful material engagement with technologies, and I wanted to offer the manifesto writers a moment to reflect on their manifestos since then and now. How have they worked, what's happened, and how might you do your manifesto V2, bearing in mind we've got no cameras.
Layla, what do you say?
We adapted Platform 21 to make it look prettier. So, I think that from a design perspective, ultimately everything that we create has an impact on the planet, right? Like you have to break eggs to make an omelette. And so it's super important that we understand as individuals, as citizens, what the impact of the things that we engage with have. And that transparency doesn't exist. It's very interesting to hear about it from this kind of tech sector, which I'm not that familiar with. But I think that manifestos are really just rallying points, right? It's like schematic. No, I'm trying to say semantics, but my brain is not really suddenly I've got a chip where I can talk about in computer speak. Whoa, what happened? It's all you guys. Yeah, I forgot what I was going to say now. Oh yeah, that word. It really gives people something to talk about, and that's what we use the Repair Manifesto for. And change takes different techniques and tools and tactics to engage people, and you need different levels of engagement, So getting your customers to care about things is just as important as having things that people read and they go, holy shit, I don't know how my products are made, and I want to have some sort of more participatory role in that. So I think that, everybody should always find language that helps engage people with change.
Also, I'm collecting manifestos. So if you have written a manifesto, particularly if it's about the Internet of Things or mentions the Internet of Things, please send me your manifesto for my manifesto collection. Thank you.
The Sugru folks have? You want to weigh in?
Just kind of fuel the conversation around repair, but use it in use the language that are going to So we basically, I mean, the headline really is that we kind of promote repair as not being a boring form of creativity, but being sort of the most humble and creative, of all art forms. That's kind of our line, really. So I think recently we sort of hooked up with an animation expert. So we've got various shorts, GIFs to share online and just reach out to kind of younger audiences.
That's awesome.
Well, thanks to the panel for that outstanding.
What about his?
Oh yeah, are you going to give a reflection or?
I can just very briefly. First of all, it's interesting. I actually wrote our manifesto before Platform 21 released theirs.
Oh yeah.
But I mean, it sat on my hard drive for 2 years, and then they released theirs, and I sat on it. So we really started.
Designed the iPhone before
Yeah.
Apple did too.
No, I'm not by any means, but I mean, it's just amazing because they took it. I mean, all of us have taken just a completely different angle on this. So for me, the idea that repair teaches engineering is important, which is sort of the opposite of what you're proposing here, and I mean, both equally valid. So I think it's very, very exciting. One final thing I wanted to say: we've been having a lot of fun with Sugru. We think it's really important that iFixit and Sugru are supporting the entire repair community. And so anyone who's hosting a repair event anywhere in the world, we want to make sure that you have the tools that you need to do your job effectively. So anyone who starts a repair cafe or fix-it clinic or something, send us an email at community@ifixit.com, and we will send you a free iFixit toolkit and some Sugru to help you get kick-started. Because we think what you're doing is so important. We want to say thank you and do everything that we can to catalyze the movement.